Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome to practice. Um, I'm very happy to be here with everyone tonight as we begin our solstice, our transition into winter, at least in this hemisphere. Right? Um, so, welcome. If you're new, please feel free to say hello and where you're at. Um, And when you're ready, you can start posting. And this is for everyone. When you're ready, you can start posting prayer requests into the box, into the chat box. If you have any questions, I may be able to get to some before we start practicing as well. So, but welcome in. Um, I spent, I've been out all day doing like Christmas shopping. But actually, I didn't really. I did do some shopping from other people, but like I just get tired and just buy gift cards for people, um, which is quick and easy. And so I spent the rest of my time shopping for me, which felt great. So that's where I've been today. Um, so we're just gonna wait just a few more minutes to allow people to come get into the space, get signed in, and to let people start posting um, greetings and any prayer requests as well. And any questions go into the question box below. All right. Oh, it's good to see everyone coming in. Yeah. So tonight I wanted to share this practice with you. Um, from well, the practice actually comes from um, one of my personal practices that I do in more formal ceremonies, which I have found really effective. And we've been doing pieces of this, um, for a while now. But it works with the internal exhale, and but we're gonna kind of add to that. So not only will there be an internal exhale, we're gonna start working with energy through like through the breath, right? Through blowing, because the breath actually, when we're intentional, the breath actually can become kind of a tool of blessing. The breath can be imbued, with a lot of energy, and we can kind of blow, literally blow on things, and we can bless things. But we can also move negative energy around through the breath. Um, if we go through a practice first, like we'll do tonight. So we'll work on that. We're going to work on, in our visualization, really, I would say, moving dark or negative energy out of the body and from around the body and from around your space. And so you can take this practice and use it to, I would say, cleanse spaces around you, cleanse rooms, your home, cleanse objects, cleanse your car, you know, um, anything, and then cleansing, you're also kind of blessing it as well. So I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be fun and different. I also want to work a little bit with connecting more to earth energy, and actually adding some movement to facilitate the arising of earth energy into our space as well. So we have a little bit, we have a couple of things. It may be just a slightly longer practice session than what we've been doing. But I think that these are really good practices for us to start working on and incorporating into our practice. So we'll go ahead. If you haven't posted your prayer request, go ahead and do that. If you have any question that needs to be answered before practice, you can add that question to ask a question section below. Okay? And so, actually, as we're waiting for people to get to post things, now, I just want to say a little bit about solstice. So, we're entering into this period of the longest night, so this is when essentially light starts returning back to the world. Well, after this long night, light starts returning. And that's, extremely symbolic. We just had Diwali in early last month. Early last month. And that's, for me, Diwali and solstice are really similar because it's really about light. It's about transitioning into a different relationship with light and dark. It's about understanding the importance of darkness. Actually, we associate so many negative connotations to dark, but we actually need the dark, right? Because within the relative, the relative is about balance, and we wouldn't really appreciate the light without the darkness, right? But it's even more than that. The darkness holds so much data for us, right? The darkness can be a reflection, like a mirror that reflects back to us some of the things that we need to work on, some of the work, the labor that we need to invest in. And so observances like this, like Diwali, like solstice, for me, are important, not so much because of the light emphasis, but more about this. For me, there's a celebration of darkness. And when we think about Tantra, Vajrayana Buddhism, the darkness, the shadow becomes a part of a skillfulness that helps us to awaken, pretty quickly. So last week we talked about protectors, and I showed you a picture of six-armed Mahakala, which we call Chadrupa, and how these beings in Mahakala, all the Mahakalas, are emanations of Chenrezig, and of course Chenrezig is the Bodhisattva of love within the Tibetan Buddhist pantheon. And for Chenrezig, this peaceful being, a being of light, to emanate forms that are dark and scary, really, and triggering, you know. Um, it helps us to understand that it helps us understand that our practice has to include a relationship with both light and darkness. You know, that we have to be as much concerned with what's conscious as we are with what is still unconscious. And that we have to develop the skill and the courage to enter into the darkness. And whatever that darkness is for you, whatever the shadow means for you. You know, to enter into essentially the shit we're always running away from, right? The stuff that we habitually just turn away and just run away from, right? That darkness can't be metabolized, or we can't enter into a relationship with the darkness until we turn around and lean into the darkness, right? And to understand that the darkness is an illusion, you know. Things remain in darkness if we are not applying the necessary labor to understand the darkness. And that understanding the darkness is what I would call metabolizing the darkness, is when we start leaning into the darkness, getting curious about it, and start unpacking it. Holding that unpacking with a lot of care, and a lot of compassion, and a lot of love. And that's what winter, you know, as we enter into winter, this is what winter can feel like. It's just a lot of darkness, a lot of coldness, a lot of shutting down, you know, and having to develop this courage, this willingness to kind of lean into the darkness and the cold, right? To get curious about the darkness and the cold. You know, and this is, you know, as you know, like you know, you feel this, you experience this, you see this, we're seeing it in the world that, like, you know, many of us are just really struggling right now. You know, not only are the holidays really triggering, you know, we're moving yet into another spike in the pandemic. American politics is just, you know, trash. As American politics has been trash for 200 years. Well, actually more than that. Well, since the Constitution and the Revolution, but how all of that kind of piles up on you. And then, you know, if you're living in a climate that actually is wintry, right? It's actually like cold and dark and snowy or whatever it may be, then it just adds. And of course the light, right? Natural light becomes a factor here. You know, as well, the lack of natural light, you know, sunlight and so forth, really impacts our mental health. So all of that's happening right now for many of us. And so I think that, like, practices where we're like harnessing light and breath and learning how to like direct light and breath into places that need that nurturing, directing that light to move darkness, you know, and to you know, disperse darkness, right? I think is incredibly important for us, and which is what we're going to do tonight. For those of you who are just joining, we're going to be working on kind of a breath practice, which I think will be really useful as many of us enter into this tough period, you know, winter and so forth. Just look at the question. So having difficulty breaking free from, oops, sorry, I have a little bit of a tight back. I haven't actually done my asana practice today, so I'm like a little bit tight, you know. But anyhow, having difficulty breaking free from hopelessness, right? You know, and part of that breaking free from hopelessness is actually allowing hopelessness to be there. You know, part of, you know, if we were to say that hopelessness is an expression of darkness, right? And again, you know, I want to re-emphasize here, when I personally talk about darkness, I'm not necessarily talking about something that I find negative. I just see darkness as material that I maybe haven't invested a lot of labor and understanding and practicing with, right? So because of that, I developed this kind of aversion, you know. So it's like, this may be too personal, this may be too much information, but I keep getting these letters from the IRS because somehow they believe I paid my taxes late. And quite frankly, I shouldn't be paying them at all, given the state of this country. But anyhow, so I keep getting the letters, right? And I'm like, oh, I'll just put it to the side. I'm not going to deal with this, you know? And then it becomes this thing, it becomes a narrative where I start convincing myself, oh my God, it's going to be like this huge bill and blah, 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 yada, yada, you know? And then just turns into this thing that I just habitually avoid. Until I just say, let's just cut through this, let's turn into this situation, you know, let's just start working with it, you know. And that's how we start working with the shadow in this case. In this case, hopelessness as an expression of the shadow. Like it's, you know, when you turn towards the shadow, you have to let the shadow be there. Like you can't keep saying that this doesn't exist because it's there, like relatively, right? It's there. How do we allow ourselves to experience hopelessness without hopelessness consuming us? You know, and sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so how do we experience the hopelessness without the hopelessness consuming us? You know? And so much of my practice here is, you know, as I've said over and over and over again, probably literally in like a majority of the talks here, you know, for me has been about talking about how I've worked really hard to touch into an experience, like the emptiness of everything arises, the emptiness of everything that arises, including expressions of the shadow and especially hopelessness. You know, that so much of my experience is the recognition that all of this is just an illusion, you know, that this experience of being in the relative, being in the body, being in the world, right, and all of that, you know, is, you know, essentially the stream, you know, the stream that I'm having. And when you understand like a little tiny piece of that, then the intensity of reality decreases, it falls away. And that falling away means that it means that you're connecting to the space, that everything isn't so serious and real, that there is this incredible space that holds everything. But when you talk about the shadow or hopelessness or suffering, however the shadow arises, you're also having to recognize that the nature of that shadow expression is also emptiness and space as well, you know. I think that that kind of realization first begins with understanding our own illusionary nature. And as I say all the time, like, practice begins internally. It begins with self. It begins with our experiences. Like, we don't start from the outside and think the outside is going to go in. We start from the inside and let that realization actually radiate out into the world around us. Right? Does that make any sense to people? You know, you can just put comments in the chat. That practice begins inward, right? Because it begins inward because the world phenomena is only an expression of my mind. You know? So I don't start working with my mind by starting over here. I work with my mind by starting to work with my thoughts and emotions. That's when I begin working with my mind, you know, and then that begins to translate outward. So if we start developing an experience of our thoughts and emotions as illusionary, then that's going to actually transfer to a realization that all other phenomena that we're encountering are also illusionary and fluid and spacious and all of that. So how is it acknowledging that this life is a dream different from disassociating? I haven't disassociated anything. I'm still in the world. You know, I just don't take the world seriously anymore. I mean, that's not disassociation. I'm here. I'm experiencing. I'm going through it. Right? Compassion is what keeps us involved in the world. It keeps us involved in people's lives. It keeps us involved in disrupting suffering. But I don't take it that seriously anymore. That's the thing. You know, disassociating is just like leaving completely, distracting, going somewhere else. You're not distracted. You can't be distracted when you've realized the truth of something. You know, the truth of something just opens up. You're like, oh, that's what that is. You know, right? It's the compassion, right? That when you lose compassion, then you start bypassing and disassociating. That's when all of that happens. I'm talking about particularly, and what I'm talking about now in terms of like mind and phenomena. The compassion keeps us connected to our experience of discomfort, and that keeps us connected to the experiences of discomfort for others around us. You know? So when people are just like bypassing, you know, we talk about relative and absolute, when people are like, well, you know, they just skip to the absolute and say, well, everything's empty. Well, that's not actually useful, you know, at all, because you haven't earned that realization. You just said something. You've quoted something from a book, right? But what I'm talking about is actually starting from the inside and actually confronting the reality of experience itself, the reality of the material mind itself, and developing a relationship that actually is about seeing into the truth, the essence of the mind itself, and how that frees us from this kind of fixation and attachment to the realness of the phenomenal world. Now I am praying and hoping that this new Matrix movie won't be shit and that will further add to my arsenal of Matrix references, you know, along these lines, you know, but we'll see, you know. It's, you know, who knows. So that's the labor right here. Like, the labor isn't dealing with the world first, it's dealing with our experience. Letting the wisdom that derives, or the clarity that derives from practice in our own experience actually help us to understand the nature of the world around us. But what we also understand is that there are countless beings who are consumed, trapped by the matrix. You know? So that's part of what drives that compassion, that also realizes that there are countless beings who are trapped. That you're beginning to understand something that's contributing to freedom and liberation. And you're compelled, right? You're compelled to be a benefit. Because you realize that no one really wants to suffer. If you don't want to suffer, no one else wants to suffer. Even though it looks like people are making choices to deepen suffering. You know, and people make choices to deepen suffering, or they think they're making choices to get free when they're really not, because of the delusion. And delusion is the opposite of wisdom, right? So delusion, you know, is the lack of clarity. So in my next book coming out, I'm kind of going through this reductionist kind of thing around like some of these philosophies in Buddhism. Like, you know, we have the 3 poisons. Sometimes there are 5 poisons. But with the 3 poisons, you know, delusion, hatred, craving. I'm just going to deal with delusion. I think delusion is at the root of craving and aversion. Because you don't know. You don't know what to embrace, and you don't know what to let go of, right? Which is what drives craving and aversion. The pulling and the pushing, and this is all happening at the same time. You're pulling things towards you, you're pushing at the same time, and of course it's going to intensify suffering for us. You know. So to unroot experiences like hopelessness, we have to start experiencing hopelessness and letting hopelessness go. You know, not pushing it away, not pulling it. You just let it go. You just let it float. You know, as I talk about in Snow, right? You know, it's like you let it go and you let it float. You know, and that's what we're trying to do. But that comes after you experience the hopelessness. Experiencing something isn't about clinging to it. It's not about fixating. It's not about rehearsing. It's allowing yourself to feel like the totality of something, and knowing that totality, the totality of that experience is something that's just an expression of the mind. And the mind, again, itself is just emptiness, space, and energy. And because of delusion, right, we found ourselves creating realities that we don't need to deal with. And so with meditation, particularly esoteric meditations that we find in Tantric Buddhism, like Mahamudra or Dzogchen, you're trying to actually devolve back into the essence, right? And we live in a world, particularly if you're really bought into the relative, you tend to be creating more. But what we're trying to do is create less, right? We're trying to get back to the essence. We're trying to get back to the essence, or you can say that you're trying to get back to the primordial experience, the experience before experience, you know, the essence. You know. We're getting back to that experience that is not born, It's not created. It's not manipulated. It just is. And the world as we experience it now as being real is a manufactured experience, and it will be an experience of incarceration, until we understand that we're creating the prisons that we're struggling in. Or we build the prisons that we're trapped by because of delusion. So how do we get from delusion to clarity? So how do we get from delusion to clarity? I've said it already, I think. So we move from delusion into clarity, or you can say from light into dark, through the practice of awareness, right? We start training and knowing what's happening. You feel, right? You experience. That's part of the awareness. You begin to experience. You begin to feel, right? But again, you're experiencing, feeling, and not clinging. And this is the thing that some of you, I think, could use some work on. And you let things go by really investing in the experience. If you're experiencing something, it's not that you can't cling in the experience, of course, but like when you're experiencing, it should be like water flowing through you, right? Or it should be like water like falling through your hands, right? You can't hold water without it leaking through your hands. That's what an experience should be like, right? It just flows through. An experience is like looking up at the clouds in the sky. The clouds are just moving, through the sky. You're not trying to stop it or get in the way, but they're just moving. You let things pass through. As I talk about in Love and Rage, right? It's like letting the energy of anger pass through, and that passing of anger actually guides us into the primary experience of anger, which is heartbrokenness, or pain, or woundedness. And then you do the same thing. You just experience and let it move through you. And of course, we have all of these so many modalities, practices that actually help us to move energy around, which is what we're going to do now in our practice tonight. Okay. And I know there's a second question here, but I'll get to that. Well, actually, it's more than one. There's lots of questions. Yeah. This last question, I'll answer that, then I'll come back to the remaining questions after our practice. I just want to start our practice before it gets too late. How do you have compassion for yourself and others for acting from delusion, which seems like it's more often than not? Well, you think about the ways in which you've created harm because you've not really known the truth of things, and then you begin to reflect on how hard it is to move from a place of delusion into a place of clarity, because how do you have compassion for yourself from acting from delusion? Well, we have to understand how hard it is to get free from a situation that we're creating, and we have absolutely, some of us have more of an idea, but for most people, we have very little idea about how we're creating this, but we're expected to kind of free ourselves at the same time when we don't really understand how this is coming about. Right? And from that reflection, there should be a lot of compassion that arises. You know, we have to do a lot of contemplating around samsara. Like we haven't really understood the sinister nature of samsara. You know, but samsara is more than what we can see or hear, taste, or sense, right? Samsara is pervasive. Samsara is a multi-world, multi-universe, thing that's happening to countless beings. That everything we do, say, and think about is saturated by delusion, and samsara is delusion, right? And understanding how hard that is, to be in this body, to be present in whatever cognitive experience that we're having, and to know, to understand or to have some inkling that at the same time our senses are lying to us, that this is actually not happening at the same time. What I'm hearing, what I'm tasting, what I'm sensing, it's just like this illusion, but it seems so real. And what the project that we're engaged in now is actually to cut through the realness into the fluid, empty, open, spacious, liberated nature of all phenomenal experience. That's the project, right? Samsara is not the same as original sin, no. Original sin is a way in which misogyny is enacted and indoctrinated into culture, but even more specific, it's a punishment. Like original sin is a punishment for knowing, right? It's a punishment for awareness. It's a punishment for transcending where you've been put, right? And samsara is just basic delusion, right? It's just like you're born into a situation and you're trying to figure out that's an easier way to say this is basically like samsara isn't a punishment. It's just kind of how it is, right? It's just an experience, right? That we're trying to free ourselves from, right? And it's not anyone's fault. Like no one deserves to be in samsara, but because we're still working to understand clarity and wisdom, right? We're still kind of wading through it, through this delusion, the samsara, We can't look at negative karma as what someone deserves for doing something negative. It's very fatalistic, and that's also I don't know what the word is, but it blames people, right? No one deserves to suffer. If we are indeed already awakened, which I believe we are, like, if I'm already a Buddha, why do I deserve to suffer? But I will experience suffering until I actually experience my nature. And we haven't done that yet. We get glimpses of it. But when you are able to rest, right, within your own nature, then that's liberation, that's awakening, because you understand the truth now. And samsara, the carceral states, which I call in my work now, the realness of the carceral state actually begins to decline. It begins to evaporate, really. But this is so much that goes into this. It's not just recognizing the nature of things, it's also confronting death and permanence, change, right? It's getting into the stream. You want to step into the stream of change, like of constant change, right? And to let go of this fear of death. And we let go of the fear of death when we begin to understand that, like, we're much more than our bodies. And that death itself is an illusion. But our fear creates this situation. Is a good way to say it, a situation, but it creates an experience that doesn't have to be. Death doesn't have to be this thing. But because we fear it so much, because we haven't spent time really sitting with the fear and understanding death, then it's a thing, that we avoid, right? And we go through a lot of trouble trying to overcome, to transcend. I think one of the most potent forms of suffering is trying to live forever. Like, I don't want to live in the carceral state forever. This is a trap, right? And it's even more of a trap if you don't get it, if you don't understand that this is a trap to begin with. Like, when you start understanding the trap and the nature of the trap, then there's liberation that starts to happen, right? There's a freedom that starts to happen, even as you're still in the state, right? But the carceral state, or samsara, is an individual experience. When I say individual, it means that I have to do labor to enter into clarity, that the collective isn't working for me. The collective isn't going to pull me into training my awareness to enter into clarity. I have to do that labor on my own, with the support of the collective and community, but I have to do labor. Like, there is no being that's going to achieve enlightenment, just by riding the coattails of someone else. Because freedom has to be something that we individually consent to, because freedom, or the consent to get free and the work involved in getting free, is this burden that we have to be present for, to hold and to work with, to get free. Freedom is a burden. Right? Was it George Bush, the second George Bush, who said freedom isn't free? I would have to agree with that. It's when I say, okay, I can sit here and say I am going to choose to be free. Great, that's a great aspiration. Now, where's the labor? There is no freedom without the labor. There's no freedom without consenting to freedom, because we are taking on the burden of training our awareness and training in compassion and love and kindness and generosity and equanimity, right? And we're going against the culture of the system, the carceral state as a system. We're going against the system. When we go against the system retaliates. The system will always retaliate. So when I talk about choosing freedom, doing the work of freedom, taking on the burden of freedom, For those of you who, are coming out of Christianity, who are still Christians, you look to the life of Christ to really understand that, to be free. He was both, an awakened spiritual being, and he was also a man, a person in an occupied territory. So not only was there a dominant group oppressing his folks, right? And when he started pushing against that, then that system of those dominant, the Romans, retaliated. Mm-hmm. It seems like our survival instinct is needed to be actually lived to experience. Our survival instinct is diluted. This is a paradoxical trap or delusion. Well, everything actually can be used skillfully until it can't be used skillfully. And that is the skillful means of getting free, is that there are things that I need to use now to get me somewhere else. And when I get there, I have to let this go, right? So the ultimate example of this is the wish to get the wish, the conviction, the aspiration to get free. For me to step across the threshold from delusion into complete enlightenment, I have to let go of all desire. And the primary desire at that level of awakening is the desire to get free. You have to let that go. And once you let the desire to get free go, then you enter into enlightenment. So you're using things to create momentum, and then you're learning how to let those things go, because they're now getting in the way. It's like working with trauma. For instance, like trauma, like trauma, there are certain expressions of trauma that have been about adapting, right, to environments, to circumstances, to situations, right? And we've used those behaviors to survive something. But the problem is, when those circumstances change, we're still holding on to those now maladaptive experiences, So when the circumstances change, part of the wisdom of trauma is actually working with awareness to look at what needs to be let go, what needs to be released, right? In order to move on, to the next level of work. And that's exactly what, it's exactly this. And the question, right, if there is a question here, is, well, it's a question for reflection. Like all of this is reflection work for all of us, right? But what are the things that I'm holding on to that I actually don't need anymore, right? And this is the season for this. This kind of intellectual, emotional work. It's like all of us, including myself, we need to really do a deep examination of the things that we don't need anymore, and going through a labor of letting them go. That includes doing the labor that isn't our labor to do. It includes holding on to relationships that we don't need to hold on to. It means letting go of stuff that really has nothing to do with our joy and our restoration. Not to say that, like, you know, that we have to hold on to certain things that, like, maybe we don't like doing, but we need to do because there's so many things at stake if we don't do it. But there are many other things that we do that we feel like we have to do that we don't need to do, and it's been a source of both physical and emotional drain for us, right? And in this period, as I always talk about, it's like you have to protect your energy. Protecting our energy means that we become more aware of how we're using our energy, and we become more sensitive to how to reserve our energy, hold more energy inward, instead of expressing so much energy outward, right? And when we're attaching to things, fixating on things, that's another way that those things are consuming us, right? And that is an extreme depletion, loss of energy. So when I talk about experiencing hopelessness, right, for me, just to experience is okay, but when I start buying into the narrative that things are hopeless, I've gotten fixated, I begin to see this hopelessness as something real, and therefore I start spending a lot of energy wrestling with hopelessness. And that's what we're not trying to wrestle with it, we're trying to allow it to move through, right? While we're also calling in supportive practices, supplementary practices that help us understand the nature of hopelessness, that help us to ground in love and support and kindness and care as well. We really don't understand what freedom means. Like, we don't really get that. We don't really understand. We don't really understand the cost of freedom, particularly in our bodies situated within the relative. I think when we've done enough work and we begin to experience some of this liberation, you will experience a lot of heartbreak with a lot of joy. Because you're leaving something. Like you've been put someplace, and now you're transcending that place. And there's grieving that arises from that transition. Because we've gotten attached, to things. We've gotten attached to how we are and where we've been put, right? And so the work of grieving, is another skillful practice of letting things go, of dissolving fixation and attachment. And if you're really doing this liberation work correctly, then you will notice how the system, samsara, or the carceral state, is attempting to retaliate. And one of the ways it retaliates is through how people begin to misunderstand your experience of freedom. That you'll get blamed and judged and all this. Well, look at these great spiritual leaders who've come in the past. Jesus was crucified. If we continue this conversation about Jesus was crucified. It was capital punishment. He was, a victim of the state. But we don't even, even speaking more about Jesus, we don't even understand Jesus enough, you know. So, as I said before, often is that some of you haven't really gotten serious about this. You really haven't. You haven't really, you like to think about freedom and talk about freedom and read about freedom. You love listening to me talk about freedom, but you haven't actually made a solid commitment to get free. A lot of that is because of the fear of the cost and the burden. But so yeah, there's a cost and a burden, but there's also the experience of awakening and the experience of space and the experience of beginning to see through the illusion of the phenomenal world. And that is what holds the burden of the work of freedom. It's not possible, it wouldn't be possible to hold this burden without getting the insight into the nature of things, which begins to neutralize the impact of the work to get free. And rightfully so, you're not committing to this because you're still attached to the guarantee of the burden. And you don't believe, you don't have faith in the realization that begins to arise when you take on that burden, that begins to hold the burden. It's this whole saying, right, that, it was actually the Zen saying, right, that you jump from the ledge and the net will catch you. This is what this is. You have to jump off the ledge. And not only are you believing that the net catches you, you have no doubts that you're going to get caught. Now I'm going to refrain from a Matrix reference. It's a whole bunch of references popping up from the Matrix, but you have to buck the system. You have to challenge the system. And when you challenge the system will not hold up. Because the system is an illusion. Once you stop believing in the system and actually start believing in freedom, the system becomes disrupted. Because the system, the carceral state, samsara, is fueled by belief. We believe this is real, and therefore it's going to be real. Of course, until Morpheus and Neo shows up. See, I tried to, I didn't want to say it. It's more Morpheus, though, actually, than I. But anyhow. The system is not rooted in identity. The system is rooted in basic delusion. It's not just identity. It's everything. When you begin to develop a sense of the essence of one thing, you develop a sense of essence for everything. Because the work that it took to crack into the essence of one thing, you also begin to understand that that one thing is everything. You crack into the essence of a thought, you crack into everything. It doesn't matter what it is, right? But again, we have to start from the inside, right? So to be fair, once you do the internal cracking into the essence of things, then the phenomenal world cracks. right? And that's the end of samsara for you. And unless everyone else is doing this work, right, it's the continuation of the carceral state of samsara for the rest of everyone else. When you have that experience, that realization, then you are compelled to be of benefit for others, because that cracking of the system also means that you've done this intense emotional labor of actually understanding the brutality of the carceral state. That you've developed the capacity to hold everything. All the hate, all the violence, all the ugliness, all the whatever, evil. And there is evil, right? There is evil. There are beings, that are only about hurting and creating destruction. That is their nature, to do that, right? And the relative, where there is great dark, in the relative, where there is great light, there's also going to be great dark, because the relative, the carceral state, is bound by the law of balance. It's the binary. It's another expression of the binary. If there's a left, there's going to be a right. If there's an up, there's going to be a down. Right? Of course, that's all an illusion, but if you're bought into the realness of this, then the balance is the law of the carceral state. But if there's an experience of being bound, then there's also an experience of being free. So you can use that law to actually help us work towards freedom. If I'm bound, then there's another powerful experience of being unbound. Yeah, there are beings with no basic goodness. But I will say this about that, is that there are there are experiences, there are things that arise as experience, there are things that arise as conscious beings that aren't necessarily conscious. But when you're, and this is going to be really complicated, but we need to actually start practicing too, but there are beings who seem conscious, but they're not conscious. So if they're not conscious, then they don't have this kind of basic goodness. And there are beings who may be conscious, who are expressing a lot of ill will, that actually, I don't want to say never attain awakening, but this is what I'll say: that there's always going to be a samsara, right? There's always going to be a samsara, which is a weird thing to say, Um, but actually, that's actually a teaching that I got from a Rinpoche, actually. There's always going to be a samsara, because samsara is an individual experience that we can experience collectively, but at the heart of it is still an individual experience. And since beings are numberless, literally numberless, like there's beings are numberless, and not all beings will awaken in a timely manner, or at all maybe. Which gets into the question of like infinity and what's forever and the nature of time, and this is where you start getting limited. You know, once you start knocking on this door, you have to be very careful. You know, because it's like a rabbit hole. Like you're just like falling down a rabbit hole. So it's important to get to places where you're like, oh, I can only talk about things that I have experience in. I don't talk about things that I just read in a book or studied. You know, I only talk about things that I have directly experienced, the things that I directly see in my practice and just all the time, the things that I feel and perceive and intuit. Like that's what I come from, you know, or those experiences. So, and as Dharma practitioners, that's what we're called to do. We're actually called to learn from experience itself. What is experience telling me? What is the nature of this experience? You know, and that's really at the nature. What's the nature of this experience? What's happening here? You know, using my awareness to get really deep into the experience, to get into the essence. So that experience actually starts teaching me. You know, there are so many brilliant scholarly. Well, I'll just say this. Let's just get more direct. You know, I went. You know, I did my graduate work at Harvard with brilliance, like Buddhist scholars who at the same time I believe had no experience of the mind, basically, right? So it's like I could listen to people offer brilliant lectures about these qualities of mind and different philosophies and different things like that, but then it was like, well, great, but what's your experience of this? You know, because you're bound by texts, right, and scholarship, you know, but in practice, I am devoted to how my awareness holds experience and allows my experience to become the teacher. The texts, the philosophies, the teachings, they create a foundation for our study and our practice. But unfortunately, too many of us stay there. We think that reading a book is the same thing as practicing. And it's not. I'll just be quite frank about this. Reading a book isn't practice. It's a supplement to our practice. It's an important foundation to our practice, but it's not practice. Practice is training in awareness, period. That's practice. Training my awareness. Training my awareness to pierce into the nature of all phenomena. Right, to pierce into the nature of all phenomena is at the same time recognizing the essence of my mind, which is the same thing as saying recognizing my Buddha nature. if I were to like have like a graphic or like a pie chart, then in that pie chart, practice would take up 2/3 of that chart, and 1/3 of that chart would be study. I think that's a fair way to situate studying into our practice. If you're studying more than practicing, then you need to like rebalance that equation. So basically, a safe way of doing this is saying that look at your time of practice and study. You should be practicing more than studying. Like you should read, like you may read a teaching or something, a pith instruction. You should put the book down and spend time practicing that pith instruction, reflecting on that pith instruction, right? Metabolizing it. It's not enough to say, oh, I got this, I understand this teaching. What we have to do is go further and to embody that teaching, not just to have an intellectual understanding, but to allow that teaching to infiltrate our flesh, to work its way into our bones. So that teaching moves from the head into the heart, into the body. And when it moves into the body, you won't ever forget it, because the body holds the essence of all the teachings when we allow it to. You know? But listen, we need to do at least 30 minutes of practice, so we're going to go over. All right. Sorry. But it's fine. Let's start. And we'll try to come back to some questions at the end. Time is relative, but my dinner is waiting for me, so that's not relative. That's an actuality. I am hungry. So the faster we start practice, the faster I'm having dinner. Okay. So again, we're going to work with the breath. Again, both internal, external. I'm going to save the energy work practice for next week. So they'll give us some time to move through the main practice. Okay. So yeah. So let's begin. As always, coming into a position that feels appropriate for you. And just allowing yourself to settle. So shifting your attention to the seats, the weight of the body, the sensation of the body making contact with your seat. And letting that sensation actually ground you a little bit. So we've been very high up, intellectually. So let's start grounding, some of this energy into the body, into the seats. And so when I shift my attention, right, to the weight of my body, the sensation of my body making contact with the seat, that sensation actually is something that takes care of me, because it gently invites me to shift this energy of awareness down, deeper, closer to the earth. And when we do that, more of the wisdom of the body begins to arise. Not just the intellect, but the wisdom of the body. And it brings us into alignment with the timeline of the body. The body is happening in this moment. The mind is happening. The mind has no linear trajectory. The mind is just everywhere in the past, present, and future. Some of us don't get that, but the mind has no limits, so it's everywhere. So coming back to the body, the weight of the body, the seat, actually invites us to come into alignment with the timeline of the body. And letting go. So this is letting go, letting float, right? The two last stages of the snow practice. Letting the thoughts, letting the emotions, letting the hopelessness, maybe as much as you can, letting that go, turning that energy, that fixated energy, that clinging energy, that anxious energy, redirecting it through awareness into the weight of the body and the seat. I know that sounds really ambiguous, but just work with that as best you can. So this is when the data from practice, or the teaching, or the wisdom of our practice begins to arise as early as now. What's the data? What is the practice, this awareness, focusing on the weight of the body and the seat? What is it teaching you right now? What experiences of space, openness, and freedom begin to emerge just by paying attention, allowing your attention to be held by this sensation? And let's go deeper now. Let's begin to touch into the earth. Right? So shifting this experience of awareness down into the earth, touching the earth. And again, this can be a very abstract, very open, maybe ambiguous experience, but that's okay. Right? Because it's energy meeting energy. So the energy of our awareness meeting the energy of this element of the earth. And they can be a quite nuanced, faint experience. But just telling yourself that my awareness is touching the earth is enough. Your awareness can find its way there, maybe without a deep sense of what you're touching, but it's beginning to touch. And over time we begin to train in understanding what it feels like to actually, what the specific nuanced energies are that are associated with our awareness touching the earth. Or rather, the earth is a particular kind of energy that we have to train to become more aware of in practice. But as I touch into the earth, I feel the earth touching me back. I feel the energy of stability, of stillness, of groundedness. In my awareness, I can sense richness and nurturing, joy from the earth as well. So what are you sensing now? And again, recognizing the ancestral indigenous history of the land. And if you feel able to do this, really touching into what many of you feel is the sadness of the earth. And again, just noticing and letting it go. You don't have to hold on to it. You don't have to engage with it. You're just touching it and allowing it to be there. Again, as I stated earlier, it's like water running through you or air, right? Like you're not filling up with this energy, it's just moving through you. That's what energy does, it just moves. And when it's not moving, you can move it as well. Can you let the seat and the earth under you hold you, take care of you? Or in other words, can you surrender to being held by the earth and the seat? And so I want to move on into evoking the energy of Medicine Buddha in the space around us, right? And we're going to open this first part of the practice with our introductory mantra. I call it the mantra of evoking. And that's Minla Sangye Kino Soha, which is, Medicine Buddha, please think of me. But again, Kino can be translated into anything that you need from Medicine Buddha right now. Think of me, hear me, listen to me, hold me, take care of me, heal me, sit with me, cry with me, laugh with me. So Medicine Buddha in this form becomes a spiritual friend who meets us where we are, who offers us what we need in this moment. And so as we begin to chant this a few times, I invite you to just reflect on what that feels like for the friend, for the beloved, to meet you where you are, to offer you what you need in this second. So what do you need in this second? And as we chant, the chant becomes a prayer to Medicine Buddha to emerge energetically in the space around us to offer us what we need. Okay? So we'll begin. Om La Sangye Hino Soa Om La Sangye Hino Soa Om La Sangye Hino Soha. And so the space around us begins to awaken with the consciousness of Medicine Buddha. And again, we can experience the energy of that consciousness by imagining what it feels like for us to be met where we are, to be offered what we need in this moment. What does that feel like? And whatever that feeling is the energy that's emerging around us. And that energy is the essence of Medicine Buddha, of Minla Sangye. If you want to go a little further with this, you can imagine that this energy, this consciousness around you is like light, a warm, soft light, a glow, a radiance in the space around us. Just take a few moments to imagine as much of that as you can. And if you can't imagine that or see that, then you can just tell yourself, okay, this is happening. And we don't have to see or feel anything. We can just say, this is happening. The Medicine Buddha has awakened. So I want to turn our attention to the breath. And if you're not really working with the breath right now, I'll give it another way to get into the practice. But first, for those of us who are working with the breath, we begin to slowly imagine that we're inhaling the energy of Medicine Buddha around us. In whatever form you're imagining that energy, we're inhaling it into our bodies. And actually we can imagine inhaling it into the heart center. Right? So we're breathing in and out of the heart center, but we're inhaling it deeply into the heart center, inhaling that energy that consciousness of Medicine Buddha into the heart center. And allowing the heart center to fill up with this energy, this awakened consciousness of Medicine Buddha, which again feels like being met skillfully in this moment with what we need. And if you're not working with the breath, just allowing that energy just to kind of start streaming into your heart center if you're not doing the breath. And so your heart center is being filled up with this energy. But keep the energy in the heart center for right now. We'll move into our main mantra, Tea Talum Bekense Maha Bekense Rasa Sumungate Soha, which is simply a prayer to Medicine Buddha for healing. And in the first part of our mantra practice, we're just breathing in or allowing that energy, that consciousness of Medicine Buddha to move into the heart center, to fill the heart center up, and slowly we begin to imagine, in whatever way is appropriate for you, that the heart is full, the heart center is full of energy, or it begins to glow, or whatever feels appropriate for you. And just keeping that energy right concentrated in the heart center for the first part of our mantra. And allowing the mantra to allow the energy and the practice to go much deeper into the energy body. This is what we're using the mantra for, as a bridge to move deeper into these subtle forms of energy, which we call the subtle energy body. Okay? So we begin. O Tea Talum Bekense Maha Bekense Rasa Sumungate Soha. Tea Talum Bekense Maha Bekense Rasa Sumungate Soha. Tea Talum Bekense Maha Bekense Rasa Sumungate Soha. Tea Talum Bekense Maha Bekense So we're going to go further into the practice. And this is the breathing practice. And we'll just do the first stage of this breathing practice. We'll come back to it next Monday. So in this first stage of our breathing practice, so we've been inhaling or allowing that energy of Medicine Buddha, the consciousness of Medicine Buddha to enter into the heart, filling the heart center up. And now with the exhale, we're going to imagine exhaling the energy from the heart center into parts of the body that we feel need healing, that need support. Right? So, of course, there are different ways to even do this. That I move through very different methods depending on, what I'm working with in the moment. But tonight, in this session, we're just going to do this one method of inhaling. If you're using the breath, first I'm going to do the breath practice, inhaling into the heart center. And then directing the internal exhale into a part of the body that maybe needs healing, that needs support. So it's imagining, like for instance, if I'm working with my hand, if I feel like my hand, actually my wrist is a little sore from doing all this shopping today at Nordstrom's rack. Anyhow, if I feel a little soreness here, then as I breathe into the heart center, I imagine exhaling internally, right down my arm, into my wrists. And I am imagining that the energy that's creating that discomfort slowly begins to be dissolved, or we can imagine it just leaving, being exhaled from the body. So that energy of healing from the heart center moves into that part of the body. It dissolves it, or it pushes that energy out of the body. And so again, picking whatever part of the physical body that you want to work with. It doesn't have to be every part of the body, but maybe something that maybe you want to get a little more support in and around, right? So figuring that out for yourself as we prepare to move back into the practice. So if you're not working with the breath, just imagine that that energy from the heart center begins to find its way to wherever it may need that healing. If you're experiencing, maybe experiences of disassociation, right? You can imagine that the heart center, from the heart center, the whole body is being filled with this energy of healing, right? And in that filling up, maybe praying or developing an aspiration for the healing of that disassociation. And just do that, okay? So we'll begin again. O Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Maha Begenze Rasa Sumunga Tesoa Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Maha Begenze Rasa Sumunga Tesoa Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Maha Begenze Rasa Sumunga Tesoa Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Maha Begenze Rasa Sumunga Tesoa Jeyata Om Begenze, Begenze, Mahabegenze, Rasa Sumangake Soa. 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 Jeyata Om Begenze, Begenze, Mahabegenze, Mahabegenze Soa. Jeyata Om Begenze, Begenze, Mahabegenze, Rasa Sumangake 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 Soa. And for the last part of our mantra practice, I won't offer the prayer request formally, but instead, for those of you who have offered prayers and for those of you who've been reading through the prayer requests, for the next part of our practice, I want you to imagine that you are breathing, exhaling this energy of healing into, again, the situations, the experiences of those we've offered prayers for. If there's a particular maybe diagnosis or illness or something associated, with the part of the body of someone we're praying for, we can direct that energy directly into that part of the body. For instance, my uncle is recovering from open heart surgery. So I will be imagining streaming or exhaling. If you're working with a breath or not, so choose that method, whichever method is appropriate for you. But directing this energy of healing from my heart center into the heart of my uncle who's in the hospital recovering. Okay, so something like that is appropriate. If you're praying, offering prayers for yourself, send that energy right back to yourself and allow yourself to be held and to be taken care of by Medicine Buddha, by the consciousness, the love, the compassion of Medicine Buddha, and see if we can surrender a little more to that energy, that consciousness of Medicine Buddha. Okay? So we begin again. Oh, Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Maha Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Maha Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Maha Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua Teya Taum Begenze Begenze Ma Begenze Raza Sumunga Tesua 제야자옴 백은제 백은제 마하백은제 아스수문가제수하 제야자옴 백은제 백은제 마하백은제 라스수문가제수하. So, shifting our attention back to our heart center, noticing or feeling this concentration of healing energy, which is just the expression of Medicine Buddha's consciousness in the heart center. Making an aspiration right now to hold as much energy in the heart center and in the body as we possibly can as we begin to transition out of the practice. So in a way, from my end, I guess, I make a prayer and an aspiration to create this seal around you so that you're able to hold and retain as much of this energy as possible as we move into the heart of this holiday season and into the heart of a renewed surge in coronavirus. May the seal will last and sustain you through the weekend until we're able to meet again next Monday. When you're ready, shifting your attention down to the seat again, noticing the weight of your body. Maybe if your feet are on the floor, noticing the contact of your feet with the floor. Or even just touching the earth through your awareness. Allowing these experiences, these sensations to ground you. Bring you back into the moment, into the present, in line with the body. And we're going to transition into our closing prayer, which is our dedication of merit practice, by reciting Shantideva's prayer from the Bodhisattva's, our guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. I recite this 3 times. Okay. May I be a protector to all those without protection, a leader for those who serve, the leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space, and the great elements such as earth, and I always support the life of all the balanced creatures, and until they pass away from pain, and I also be the source of life for all the realms of very beings that reach into the ends of space. May I be a protector to all those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, and until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. And finally, may I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all the sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, and until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your practice. I will have to just come back to these questions next Monday. And yeah, just a little piece of encouragement, for those of us who are being compelled to spend time with family, and to do whatever traveling that some of us may be doing, and dealing with all of that. Just remember the compassion for yourself. Remember the compassion for everyone else. Let things flow, let things go. Remember the earth as an element of grounding. Allow the earth to help us, support us, as things arise for us, and allowing ourselves to offer and release that energy into the earth where it will be held and neutralized by the earth. Remember to take care of ourselves, set boundaries, rest. Remember our practices of light, the practices of light that we've been doing in these sessions, but also remember the physical element of light, which, fire, sun, as we move into solstice and the winter season, really rely, on natural light, like, candles, if you have a fireplace or a fire pit or something like that, really begin to draw energy, like from fire, from light, and hold that energy, that light in the heart center, and allow that energy to kind of disperse and spread throughout the body. As a practice. So that's it for me. So thank you, everyone, for practicing. This is recorded, so come back and practice this or any other practices. The 37 practices, sessions that we have. This is a resource for all of us. All right. Thank you, everyone, and please be blessed, please be well, please be at ease until we meet again. Thank you.